without further ado, Johannes joining us from Lund, from another country, but not so far away this time.
80 kilometers, I think.
Yeah, 80 kilometers. And Johannes is talking about Ubuntu Snaps, but in relation to that, Fidus writer, I would just say I've now tried it. I think it's amazing, really interesting way to write academic papers. So check it out too. And a big hand for Johannes.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I will today talk about distributing apps using Ubuntu Snaps and specifically Django apps and the experience that we have had with one particular app, which is what Benjamin just mentioned, Fidus Writer. For those of you who haven't heard of Fidus Writer before, it's an open source app, and it's kind of like Microsoft Office 365 Online or Google Docs or any of these others, except that like you can see in here, you don't have font sizes you can change. You can just say that this is headline level 2 and so on. But it's meant to be used for by non-technical users. It has a templating system. You can make books with it. It's quite extendable, so there's a number of plugins for it and so on. And it's within this space quite stable. It's 9.5 years old. And throughout those 9.5 years, we've not always had financing. So we needed a way to keep this stable, because what mostly happens to these small startup projects is that somebody gets a bunch of money for a while. They have an app, it runs a year, app is gone, but the text have a much longer lifespan. No? So people will not put that text into an app that's gone or potentially gone within 2 years. So we really tried to make this like as long-lived as possible and as sustainable as possible, even when we don't have financing at some stages. And one of the really big selling points for this is you can self-host it. Okay, so on top of all these other things, people can run it on their own server, and they really don't need to have any communication with us. And so for the first, I don't even know how many years, maybe 5-6 years, the way we would have it is we would have one server that we would maintain ourselves, and then there would be a growing number of universities and private individuals and professors and so on who would start running their own instances. And we would try to give them support for this, right? And sometimes they would have money for it, sometimes they would not. Sometimes it would be, a private individual in a country far away from here, and they would have their own research on their own server, and like they wouldn't want to give us access, but also, they couldn't maintain it easily. So we had that problem. A few years ago, we looked at what are the options out there? Like, how can we improve this and make this more sustainable? And what seems to still be the case, and please teach me about something new that I don't know about, but is that companies that run some kind of Django app have some specific solution of how to deploy this, right? You have 1 to 2 developers who can do this within the organization. There's specific steps that they have to go through. When a new developer comes in, and this is a well-trained developer, it takes them up to multiple days to get the app that the organization is running up and running on their laptop. There is Docker, which was supposed to make things super easy, because you can just one command and it's just running and everything's just working. Unfortunately, that's often not quite as easy, and I have been in situations where I had to help especially designers and people who are technical but not exactly backend technical, and try to help them get things set up, and it would just take forever, and really wasn't feasible for other outside of this developer community. And then we looked at okay, what are the specific requirements for us? Because we have the self-hosting aspect. So we needed it installed not just on one main server and some developer laptops, but we needed it on like hundreds of servers and or potentially thousands sometime in the future. And most of these we do not control. Of course, the one that we provide, we control, but anybody else can run it, and we do not control those instances. Also, as you know, the app grew, we started having things like a spell check or a grammar checker built in, where we use Language Tool, another open source project, but it's a Java project. And somehow we also need to get that set up. So if you need to give people instructions who are like, you know, this is the first thing, if the first time they set up a server and they need to set up both a Django app and a Java app, it's not exactly easy. So yeah, our users are like professors, PhD students, and others who are like have some basic understanding of a computer, but not really enough to deploy normal apps to servers. So yeah, and then addition to that, because we first it was just one app, and then we found out like, oh, actually there's like a specific community that makes books with this. And so we made some plugins for them. And then there's others who just use this to like export to LaTeX. And others, they just want the JETS export and so on. And so we started making various sub-modules, like plugins for it. And not everybody wanted to have everything enabled at the same time. And so somehow we needed to get like all this, we needed to be able to let people enable and disable plugins and specific configurations while still being easy enough for normal computer users. So we looked at what's out there, and this was at least what we found at the time. There was Flatpak, which is like a relatively new and quite popular system for distributing packages. The problem with it is it's desktop only, so ours being a server-based app, this didn't really work. Then there was AppImage. This is desktop focused. I believe it's theoretically possible to run server-based things, but it's not really made for it. And there's no built-in auto updating. So what we really wanted is to like be able to like push a button and say like all the ones that have this point release, you know, please update to the next point release without us having to enter their server. And so that was really only Ubuntu Snaps, as far as I'm aware, that does all this. Now, of course, it's being criticized for this company Canonical controlling the App Store, but it does include auto updates. It's server friendly, meaning you can make these server-based apps, although as far as I'm aware, there's hardly anybody doing it. And an advantage is that it's because it's both desktop and server. For a while, we were like, some were asking, can you make a desktop app for us? Because I really just, you know, want to write on my own laptop and then like click the export to LaTeX or export to JETS button and then get that out. And this way we could just say, well, just install the server version on your own laptop and you're good to go. Like that works just as well, or almost the same. You can run it in your own browser and there you have it. Yeah, so that's how we ended up with Ubuntu Snaps. Now, yeah, so we have the desktop and server in the same app. And there are also some advantages for like how the update works. So if what it does is it tries to update, and if the update, so it takes the data that is associated with an app, right? It tries to use it with the new version of the app. If that fails, then it rolls back the update. So you're back to the old version. So you should never end up in a situation where there's a broken update has somehow destroyed the system for a user. The worst case is that the user ends up with an older version that is not being updated, and then you can go in manually and help them and so on. But in most cases, that really shouldn't help. The fact that they have this app store means that it's really just like a one click in the search in the Ubuntu App Store for Fidus Writer, click install, and you have it running. of course, this basic install is not, you still don't have a domain name, you don't have, an HTTPS certificate, but those are fairly easy steps to add on top of it later on. And also it has a different channels. So it has you can have the Edge channel. So that's the newest version that's maybe not as stable. And then you have the stable channel, where this is always a version that is rock solid and should never break, because it has been in the Edge channel first for a while, and we've done the extra testing with those users who are willing to do it. Yeah, now when I just because some are not familiar with how this works in snaps, is by default snaps update automatically, right? So you just have the system running, and it pulls down the next version immediately. However, you can manually disable this. So for some reason, for security reasons, so if some want to monitor exactly what is installing, they can disable it. And then if they so one question we received is, well, what happens if you disable it and then you enable it again 2 years later, right? Does it just then jump from version 2 to version 416, and clearly the data won't be able to be read by the latest version? And there is actually, they have something built in for this, which is called epochs, where it knows which version can read which version of the data, and you mark which version of the data the current data is. So it will then update for, say, you have one version that can read data of version 5 and write data of version 6, and then another one that can read version 6 and write the data of version 7, and so on. And so it will update those versions that are needed to get from wherever the user is currently to what the latest release is out there. So that's all really, really smart. And then the last part is that we don't have the resources to bundle this for a bunch of different architectures. So the way it works is we just put everything on our repository, click a button on their website, and then the final package is being built for all these various architectures. And so people can run it on different servers, even though we just have the AMD 64, which is probably the most common nowadays on laptops. So what did we need to do? Well, in the FIDOS writer part, we needed to do some code changes. The first thing is that we packaged everything into PyPy packages. So that we made PyPy packages for each of the plugins and of the main app. And we modified the when you have so the plugins are Django apps, right? But you know how normally you have to both add the apps to the installed apps list in the settings file, and additionally add the URLs to be linked from the main URLs file, and potentially other places. So we basically made that simplified that, so that just by adding any application to the installed apps list, it would automatically drag in the URLs. So that way, the people who have to maintain this, all they have to do is add the name of a plugin in the installed apps list, and boom, that's just working for them. Then additionally, we created a repository, the FIDOS Writer Snap repository, which is based on the Nextcloud Snap repository, which is open for everyone to see. And I think that's a PHP app. So we learned a lot of what they did and how they did things, but obviously it wasn't quite the same because it's not a Python app. But we did things for example, they have a MySQL server packaged into it, and we copied a lot of those things. But some extra things we bundled in there is we bundled the Nano editor, and then so we created an extra command, which is this fidoswriter.configure, which you can execute, which basically opens the Nano editor on your configuration file. And we made that a little more child safe by adding, after you edit the configuration file, if you made some mistake, that means that the file is no longer valid Python, or that you can't run like manage py help with this file, it will fail. So that way, like the user should not be able to accidentally destroy their configuration file and thereby destroy their server. Yes, just quickly to see what that looks like. If I try to execute it here, right? So this is like a normal configuration file, and what like a non-technical user may do is write something like, you know, some setting like that. No, forgot to put the quotation mark or put like a different type of quotation mark, something like this. Now they try to save it. So exit, and now it tells me, no, this is no longer valid. Do I want to fix it or not? If yes, I get thrown back into it. And then they try to fix it, and eventually they'll send us an email saying like, your program is wrong, you know, and then we try to help them with this, but at least they're not breaking their server accidentally. And so far, this has taken care of like almost all the stupid mistakes that people can do by misconfiguring their configuration file. Yes. And then the last thing is we needed to add like a type of migration specifically for those things that have to change from one version to another that are not in the database. And I can show you what that looks like. So this is an example of this. So this is like a poor man's migration system. No, but what this does is that what we did in this case was we had a plugin that used to be called GitHub Export, but we added GitLab support for it, and so it should no longer be called GitHub Export, just Git Repo Export. So we needed in all the configuration files, when they switched to the new version, it needed to say Git Repo Export rather than GitHub Export, and so we just wrote this very basic, you know, Python script, which is being run on anybody doing the upgrade from one version to the next one, replacing anywhere where it says GitHub Export to Git Repo Export. Now, you may say this isn't really safe because maybe somebody in their configuration file, you know, their child's name was GitHub, and so somehow they put, you know, this word in there and like whatnot. Yeah, that's true. But remember, like it does the rollback. No, so if somehow this breaks the whole system, we are still being rolled back to the version before this, and so we don't end up in a situation where we have a broken configuration or broken server. Now, what does the distribution look like now? Well, as you can see, it's like kind of going up. There's some spikes. This is whenever I believe this is whenever Ubuntu features us in their app store. Then like lots of people click on it, so then it goes up and goes down a bit after that. But still, it's like at 433. That's more installations than what, you know, our small team of 4 people who are not financed constantly would be able to help with and fix and install and so on. You can see it's like many different places. 50 in Germany. In Germany, there's like actually several universities using it officially and who also paid for it. Denmark, 0. Okay. We even put a Danish name on it, so I'm not sure what that is about. Yeah. So and here just an example. So this is the Technical University of Munich. Okay, they have an installation, and yeah, where's here you are. Because of we were just talking about the 12-factor app this morning, right? So I mean, this is kind of what we're doing is kind of separation of the app and the data, right? Because Ubuntu does this, but not quite, because in this case, what they needed is like a specialized plugin for just their server. And they needed one so that their students can log in with their student login system, and also a mechanism so that all students would be deleted after a certain period of time to be compliant with GDPR. And so this was like very specific, something that they had programmed It's like the calls we had to make was not anything standardized. So we had to program it exactly for them. And so this plugin lives in the user data of this Ubuntu Snap. And eventually this could break. But at that stage, we see like we get an alert like, oh, they didn't update. Why didn't it update? And then we can go in and fix it for them. But so far, for the last, I think 2 major versions and a number of point releases, we haven't had really any problems with it, and it's just updating by itself and just working. So our conclusion with this so far, it's working really well, but it's not perfect. So it does work to get like the app to just be installable with a single click and so on. It's really easy for us to maintain a lot of instances everywhere and also to let people that don't want to let us onto their server, to let them help us in fixing some bugs and so on. But there's still a number of issues with it. So the first is this is not very common. And I don't really know why, because it seems like other than Nextcloud and FidoSwiter, there should be so many other apps that people for some reason want to run on their own servers. But there doesn't seem to be like a common mechanism for letting people install those kinds of apps. And so because it is so uncommon, like our help is looking at what Nextcloud did in their Snap, right? Try to ask somebody in the Ubuntu Snap forum, but there isn't really there are not many answers there like before we asked them. And in Stack Overflow, there's almost nothing. And so there's also a number of bugs in here, and you can if you look at the code, you can see of the FidoSwiter Snap code, which is on GitHub and which is also open source. You can see there are several times where we like work around a major bug that they have in their system that hasn't been fixed for multiple years, and probably because there's like hardly any demand for getting this fixed. So that's an issue. Then also
And yes.
If you're running Fidus standalone on the server, what exactly is the advantage of using snaps over a big native package?
So the question is, if you're running Fidus Writer as standalone, what is the advantage of the snap?
Over a deb package or over?
Yeah, exactly. Over the package manager, right? The traditional.
Yeah, so it has this the data rollback that at least as far as I'm aware, we don't have in the same way. That deb isn't made for that the same way. Also, the idea, at least with it, is, and I mean, it is in theory, it's working, that you can install this not just on Ubuntu, not just on Debian, but also on Red Hat and many of the others that are not deb based. It's just that, so Ubuntu has made this this is the common tool you can install on everything. But then, and so they have created these tools for even Red Hat distributions to install it there. But the Red Hat company is not very happy about it. So the Red Hat people are kind of against it because they like Flatpak, the other one.
Yeah, I have a similar question. I know that you can answer the same question about each and every alternative, but I was interested in why Docker could be a disadvantage for the people that you find using the snap is better.
Because it's harder to install. It's not like Docker. My experience with Docker installing it on Ubuntu is, first of all, you can't use the Docker version that comes with Ubuntu. You have to install some separate list of packages get them somewhere from the internet. And you need to have Docker Compose for something, which I never quite figured why that's a separate thing. And I mean, you end up spending I've on some of my last jobs, I had to use Docker, and it ended up being at least half a day or so, or a day or two, getting a new system set up with it, and you had to leak these really long instructions. It's never just one line.
So you're saving your users from this confusion.
Yeah, I mean, I can handle it. I'm a developer, but I wouldn't ask somebody. I wouldn't ask somebody else to do it. Whereas this, I mean, anybody who has, I put, my parents only know Ubuntu. They never had a Windows laptop. No? So I just put Ubuntu when they first got their computer on it. They've never seen anything else. And I could ask them to just install Fidus Writer. They know how to install packages, and then they can open their browser and see it. I think that's easy enough for them. Yeah.
You have very lucky parents. More questions? In that case, we can get a little bit closer to our schedule. But thank you so much for the talk.
You're welcome.